pay very close attention to what I'm going to say here. In Washington State, they were cracking down on foreign ownership that was coming in from China and parking money. The reason why they were coming into Washington State was because months prior, in, let's say, mid 2016, they passed the foreign buyers tax on foreign investors in Vancouver. Because the Vancouver model fell apart, and there was just everyone was just leaving Vancouver in droves because they couldn't compete with money laundering. So what happened was, in Washington State, they put in we need to know where your money's coming from. You need to disclose it. It's not like Canada. So what they did was they actually started to create numbered companies. And there's entire towers in Seattle, in King County, in Seattle, where you could go and it's entirely owned by a corporation out of China, but no one lives in it. It's completely abandoned. And there's a lot of those. So what they did was, instead of going with their names or private ownership, they started going through a corporate system, and it ties back to ownership in China. And Washington State was trying to tame the housing market, because in 2017, 18, 19, that place went on fire, Supreme, because of the foreign buyers tax that was put into Vancouver. And we even covered the headline is Chinese and investors are heading to Seattle in a frantic pace. Remember that headline? Investors heading to Seattle in a frantic pace as BC implements foreign buyers tax. And then Toronto also, we said Toronto was going to get hit by this too. And that was the tsunami that was heading east in 2016. And man, Toronto got hit hard too with this foreign money. And Seattle and all the way down to Oregon, right down to California, was completely decimated by people parking their money here in the Northwest.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And governments tend to be reactive to those things, right? Like when your real estate is going up in your city, it must be because it's such a great place to live, right? But even if you can't make that case, you've got this steady growth in property tax revenue for City Hall, so they can use it to make more diversity programs, or maybe at least finally fix the parks and the walking bridges and things like that.
Outreach centers.
Pay for development. Cities have to finance themselves like every other outreach centers. Thank you. Yeah, things like that. There's a lot of, but you reach a point in time where even though you've got these towers that are sitting empty and the value of them keeps going up because of 0% interest rates. I mean, let's face it, we've had monetary formaldehyde being injected into our system since it all died in 2008. The whole thing is Weekend at Bernie's. Mm-hmm. Eventually you reach a point where the values of those go up, but the more the values go up, the more people have to leave because they simply can't afford to live there, right? You're creating an artificial restriction on demand.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it. That's such a good way to put it. Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
I see it anyway. It's like, well, we've got all these. How could we have a demand? How could we have a supply issue with all this empty housing? Right? Why are people leaving? Well, because we get a supply issue. It's unaffordable. Supply and demand. Well, supply and demand curves don't intersect anywhere in a situation like that.
Okay.
Right? You've got all this empty housing sitting there, but no one's living in it, and everything else available is getting driven up in price. I mean, it creates an artificial wealth effect.
Okay. Speaking of wealth effect,
out of this empty housing.
Let me jump in here real quick with wealth effect, and this is kind of important. And this is what happened with the wealth effect that Supreme Cannon is explaining to us here. Here it is on our playback time machine here on the channel. Vancouver mass exodus, young families leaving. Now listen to this. A net total of 9,345 whites and 460 Indigenous people left Metro Vancouver for other parts of the province in 1 year. And that was back in 2016. I left Vancouver because Vancouver left me. Mass exodus, young people leaving the city 6 years ago. I left Vancouver, pros and cons. Housing unaffordable in BC, can't find first-time home buyers. Mass exodus of youth 7 years, 11 months ago. Housing crisis, mass exodus, morning coffee with Mike. Massive brain drain. So in line with the mass exodus, we see a brain drain happening, right? And Vancouver approves 7% property tax hike, destroying middle-class families. Mass exodus ahead. That was 3 years ago. Mass exodus, young families leaving. Brain drain 6 years ago. Proof Canada's population is now 40 million. Blue state invasion. Six-figure salary is considered low income. Mass exodus ahead. So we're reporting almost 5 years ago in some of these blue states that a six-figure annual salary wasn't enough to live in those cities already, right? So wow, we just go on to mass exodus here. We go on. Vancouver, crazy rental prices will lead to the death of the big city. Empty units and food prices 7 years ago. So this is something that we were kind of not prophesizing, but prophesizing in turn with headlines and what we were kind of seeing across the Commonwealth. Go ahead, Supreme. I'm talking too much.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, absolutely. This is crazy. There was something here, Chris. Empty houses should get bought and sold for black book value, and too bad for the owner who clearly doesn't care. 2 years empty, say goodbye. I agree with that. I actually do agree with that. If you're going to buy residential housing in a community, there should be conditions for you being there. Using it as a place to park extra money and not making it available for someone to at least rent from you is nonsense. That shouldn't be allowed. Like, there's no such thing as community standards. You're treating your own citizens as these interchangeable economic units. Yeah, I mean, of course there's a brain drain. People who could do basic math are not going to live in a place like that. It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Okay,
you can't do that.
Okay, here it is. Let's keep going real quick here since I have this open. Toronto home prices invaded by investors. This will cause a mass exodus of middle class. 6 years, 9 months ago. Get out now. Toronto mass exodus housing crisis. They will tax you to death. 5 years, 4 months ago. Wow, we could go, dude. We have. Never mind hundreds, thousands of videos about this stuff, Supreme.
This has been going on for a long time, bud.
25,000 vacant homes in Vancouver, causing artificial shortages and homeowners wealthy on paper. 6 years, 9 months ago. Wow. Anyways, I feel good at
going on for a while. Yeah.
Dude, I sleep so. But the thing is, it's like these articles are recycling. You have all these Rumble heroes, Twitter stars, influencers, all these new people that are post-COVID that are telling you, look at my price of groceries. Look at how many we've been making videos about this for the last 10, 15 years now, and it's not even none of it renaissance. Like, I guess I was too ahead. Some people were saying, Mike, you were just too ahead of the curve, or you were talking about things that people like. And I think you brought this up, Supreme. You're just talking about things that people didn't care about at the time because they were living lush and flush and living off using their homes as ATMs and not really caring about what the after effects would be. I think you told me this.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. You know what? I'm sure you brought it up too. Housing as an ATM has been a theme for quite a while, probably going back even to the mid 2000s before the big hiccup, right? Mm-hmm. That was definitely happening. But as long as people were driving around in brand new Suburbans and taking their 6-month-old kid to Disneyland and stupid stuff like that, who cared? Everyone was making money, right? You've seen those clips from The Big Short where they go visit some mortgage brokers and they don't do any kind of income check on anybody. Who cares? It's just a racket. Mm-hmm. Everyone's congratulating themselves and making big money and driving new Porsches, and everything's great, man. It's just going to go on a new plateau of prosperity, they used to say before 1929. They're just retards. We're surrounded by retards. Mm-hmm. Greedy, amoral retards who don't think about their own future. They certainly don't think about their children's future. Mm-hmm. They don't think about the effect that they're having in their own neighborhoods. They don't care because I'm getting mine, right? But what happens? It all blows up. It all blows up, and anybody who's remotely sensible has to ride that tidal wave with them when they take everything down. Like, we can get mad at politicians and bankers all day long for the things they do, but at the end of the day, it's Joe and Jane Average who crash it all.
That's right.
When they go off on these tangents, memory possessed retards. You know what? I'm inclined to think you're not completely wrong, memory man.